Hey, my spookies. Before we start tonight's show, I just want to take a moment to let you know how my dog Chicano is doing. As many of you know, he has cancer, but we're winning the fight. He's had 7 doses of chemotherapy, and tomorrow it'll be 8, the final dose. He's responding very well, and I want to say thank you so much to everybody who's gone to weeklyspooky.com and clicked on Help My Dog. We've raised over $4,000 to pay for his treatment. If you can help, please consider it. But now, it's time for the show, and this one is a chiller. Unsolved crimes are a part of American lexicon, without a doubt, but usually there's a lot to chew on. There's a lot of strange happenings and a cast of characters who may have done it. But what if someone disappeared and then when they were found had been brutalized beyond all comprehension? And now, we truly have no idea what happened.
What you are about to hear is believed to be real, based on witness accounts, testimonies, and public record. This is terrifying and true.
This week's Terrifying and True is one that gets under your skin. It's about someone who was completely innocent, as far as we know, being brutalized and murdered. And it was submitted by one of you spookies out there. Our good friend Joe sent this one in and suggested we take a look at it, as he's related to the victim. Our heart goes out to Joe's family, and we hope we've presented this in a relatively informational and tasteful way. This is the unsolved murder of David Hadaway. It's tragic, it's gruesome, and it's fascinating. And it's what we'll be covering right after these quick words from our sponsors. It's the summer of 1986. Barbara Williams sets out on a simple mission to collect a few aluminum cans for scrap money. Little did she know, fate had a chilling surprise in store for her. As she rummages through a dumpster in an alleyway near Ohio State University, she stumbles upon something far more shocking than a few discarded cans. In a moment that would haunt Barbara for years to come, she discovers the lifeless body of a young man wrapped in a blanket with his hands cruelly bound. The man was David Hadaway, a youth with his whole life ahead of him, who met a brutal end that fateful day. Decades have passed since his unsolved murder, but the chilling details of the case continue to haunt the streets of Ohio. David Gregory Hadaway was a 19-year-old student at Mifflin High School. David, lovingly known as Diamond Dave in his circle, was your typical nice guy, splitting time between school and working part-time at the local Sears. One of 8 brothers and sisters, he lived with his family on the north side, stayed out of trouble, and had no criminal record. Son to a World War II veteran, since a young age, David had developed a love of history, the military, and his country, and even aspired to join the U.S. Navy and serve his country. He had his whole life in front of him, but all these hopes and dreams met a brutal end one unfortunate day in June of 1986, shattering the lives of his friends and family. Let's go back to Barbara and her friend who was accompanying her on the 21st of July, 1986. It was around noontime when they stood behind that horrific scene, located behind an Indianola Avenue apartment building. The friends rushed to the gas station to ask for help, and soon after, the authorities arrived at the site in an alley between Chittenden and 11th Avenue. The police were able to identify the victim through his high school identification card soon after arriving at the scene, and so the investigation began. The tragic circumstances surrounding David's death are truly heartbreaking. He was fatally stabbed in the heart while under the influence of alcohol. But what makes this case truly disturbing is the sheer brutality and barbarity of the attacker's actions. The most gruesome detail that emerged was that David had been castrated, his genitals cruelly taken from him. The level of sadism required to carry out such a heinous crime is incomprehensible. As the investigation into David's death continued, authorities retraced his last known locations, leading them to a wild weekend-long party at an apartment building on 1535 North High Street, near campus. The event was open to everybody who wanted to join in the fun, with bands playing non-stop and a hot tub in the courtyard to keep the party going strong. Hundreds of people had come and gone over the course of the weekend, but most claimed to have never met David or even seen him in the crowd. Despite interviewing countless partygoers, detectives were unable to piece together a clear timeline of events. On the 19th of July, after completing his work shift at Sears, David made his way to the home of his friends, Steve and Brian Davis, located on Cleveland Avenue. After having beer together, the trio proceeded to a nearby store at the intersection of Hudson Street and Joyce Avenue at approximately 11:30 p.m. to purchase more drinks. While at the store, they became aware of a party taking place on North High Street. At around 1 or 1:30 a.m. on the 20th of July, the group arrives at the party. But when the Davis brothers left around 3 or 3:30 a.m., David decided to stay behind. They assumed he would catch a ride with someone else, but nobody could say for sure who he left with or when he departed. According to James Donovan, the nephew of David Hadaway, who has created a 2-part video discussing the murder of his uncle, the vicinity around the campus used to draw various unsavory individuals and was associated with, quote, sinister activities. Here, James makes a very interesting point. He suggests that due to the reputation of the campus area, his uncle may have been apprehensive about visiting that location. He also points out that it is likely that David had not previously ventured into that area, as it was situated at a greater distance from his usual whereabouts. If James is indeed correct, then how does it make sense for David to be at this party in the first place? The FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime developed a suspect profile for this case, which offers some chilling possibilities surrounding the nature of this crime and its perpetrators. As per this profile, the murder took place inside a building in the vicinity of the apartment complex where the party was going on. However, despite an extensive search of the surrounding apartments and buildings, detectives found no concrete evidence. The profile also suggested that the murder was prompted by a specific action. The nature of the mutilation of David's body may point towards a sexual motivation behind the killer's grisly actions. Based on the visible cuts on the body and the way it was wrapped in a blanket, the profile suggested that the killer may have had a background in medicine or knowledge of surgical procedures commonly used by morgues during the transportation of dead bodies. The profile also revealed that it is very likely that more than one person was involved, and that the killer or killers may have either committed such a crime before or since murdering David. Over the course of the next several months, the detectives interviewed numerous individuals who were present at the party, hoping to uncover any leads or witnesses that might shed light on the identity of the killer. Despite the development of the suspect profile, the investigators were unable to identify any potential suspects, while they also could not establish a clear motive for anyone to have killed David. And so, to everyone's frustration, the page for suspects in David's case file remained empty. The 1980s were a dark period in American history, marked by the chilling presence of a wickedly evil serial killer who preyed on innocent boys and men. Yes, we're talking about none other than the Milwaukee Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer, whose name still inspires fear in those who recall the heinous crimes he committed. His killing spree was so gruesome that it's not surprising that authorities explored potential links to other unsolved cases, including the brutal murder of David Hadaway. Most people are aware that Jeffrey Dahmer admitted to killing 17 individuals, but what many may not know is that he was raised in Ohio and briefly attended Ohio State University, the same campus where the party attended by David took place. Dahmer's victims were typically young men, and he was known to mutilate their bodies after killing them. The similarities between his crimes and David's murder are striking. So, is there a connection between the two cases, or is it merely a ghastly coincidence? An FBI report suggested that it was to be established whether Dahmer was in Columbus, Ohio on or about the time of the murder, and if he had any knowledge of the homicide. But the Dahmer case was heavily covered, and except for this one report, there have been no instances of a concrete link being established between the two cases. So, the possibility of Dahmer's involvement remains purely speculative. Nonetheless, even the mere possibility of such a connection is enough to send shivers down your spine. In situations like these, one can only imagine how the family dealt with this tragedy. David's brother, Don Hadaway, has fond memories of him as an outdoorsy and congenial person who had a deep love for animals. However, his trusting nature and naivety may have led to his untimely demise. His family still has many unanswered questions and no closure. At the time of David's death, his parents were attending a wedding out of town. When they returned home, they immediately grew concerned when David was nowhere to be found. Just as they were about to file a missing persons report, a detective knocked on their door the following Monday, bringing devastating news. The family suffered another loss 4 years later, when David's father passed away. The man did not get any closure or solace for his young son's death, and it seemed like all was lost. But then, a new clue was found after nearly 2 decades. Sometimes in the world of crime solving, it's the smallest clues that can make the biggest difference. For detectives working on the case of David Hadaway, the blanket that was covering the dead body could just be the break they need. This one piece of fabric could hold the key to unlocking a mystery that has baffled investigators for a very long time. Thurza McMullen was living in Columbus when she saw a Crime Stoppers piece on the nightly news about the case. A picture of a blanket flashed on the screen, and something about it caught her eye. McMullen realized that she had a blanket just like it when she was a child. Her family had gotten it from a Holiday Inn during a remodel, and she believes it was sometime between 1983 and 1986. Although she couldn't remember which Holiday Inn location it was, MapQuest showed that the closest one to the party where David was last seen was at 328 West Lane Avenue. McMullen contacted Columbus police in 2006 and spoke to a third shift officer. She told him about the blanket, but unfortunately, no one followed up with her. Even after this incident, the case of David Hadaway's tragic death lay dormant for years, but in 2010, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. Detective Russell Redman of the Columbus Police Division took up the mantle and reopened the investigation. However, to date, there have been no further developments on this case, and as of today, it has gone cold. Amidst the anguish and unanswered questions surrounding the death of David Hadaway, there is one last place of hope, in the form of a Facebook group. James Donovan, who claims to be David's nephew, and whose YouTube videos we had referred to earlier, has taken it upon himself to lead a community of friends and family on a quest for justice. Their group, aptly named Cold Case Justice for David G. Hadaway, is a beacon of aspiration for those who refuse to give up on finding the truth. But as they continue to demand answers, the burning question remains: will their tireless efforts ever lead to the closure they so desperately deserve? This case is pretty creepy, for obvious reasons, but also because it takes place in the heartland, in Ohio, where I call home. The fact that there are so few leads is truly chilling. But I can't lie, my eyebrow went up when I heard the Jeffrey Dahmer theory. Because you see, traditionally, killers of this type don't suddenly stop. They re-offend, usually with a similar modus operandi. But, as far as we know, there are no further killings of this level of brutality in this part of Ohio. When a brutal killer suddenly stops, people assume that they have either died or been arrested for another crime, or of course, moved away. Jeffrey Dahmer does fit that description because he left Ohio for Florida and then inevitably Minnesota. Our hearts go out to the families of David Hadaway, and if you have any possible information, please consider going to their Facebook group, Cold Case Justice for David G. Hadaway. As long as people care, hope is never lost. And just because we like to hear about true crime and learn about the grisly details of human life, that doesn't mean we don't have a heart that's soft and beating. So until next time, my friends, stay safe and love one another. Terrifying and True is narrated by Enrique Couto. It's executive produced by Rob Fields, produced by Daniel Wilder, with original theme music by Ray Mattis. If you have a story you'd like us to cover on the program, send us an email at weeklyspooky@gmail.com. And if you want to support us in a very direct way, go to weeklyspooky.com and click on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can support us and allow us to keep the spooky rolling and rolling and rolling. And I want to say a big thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names on the show. And they are Bobbletopia, Megan Hua, Julia Kirsch, Christopher Sullivan, Brent McCullough, Gino Lyons, Steve King, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so very much, and we'll see you next Monday.